But there's quite a bit to this vector designing, right? To getting all the shapes where you want them. So we are talking about adding kind of 2.0 effects. And we're doing that with what are called layer styles. You'll see the layer style. You can think of them as special effects we add to our layers. In this case, our layers are vectors, which is even better. I'm trying to push it off so you don't have to see these ads. There we go. So you can see it says EFF for effects, and then has a drop-down arrow. And without the effects, it doesn't look like anything. So let's go to the skull folder on top now and double-click. And let's try these effects. Let's try inner shadow. So inner shadow, we'll take that whole folder, and I'm going to do it from this edge. You can set the angle of it. And then you can set things that aren't flat graphics, right? You can set gradations. So now you see how it looks like the bones are kind of curving back because they have that shadow softly at the edge. I can play with the spread of it, but I kind of liked it right where it was, right there. Very subtle. And the other thing I love about these effects, they can always be turned on and off, so you can decide if you like them or not. But you can also right-click on the layer and copy the layer style. Where it says layer style, you can copy it, and then you can apply it to other things. So if I have auto-select layer on, I can go to this white eyeball, and I can right-click on it and say layer style paste, and it will paste that same effect onto the white eyeball. I can do that here as well. Go to layer style and paste. I can do it to the red layer style, or I can set my own new layer style to it, right? But because this inner shadow is all based on the same angle and the same settings, it will make everything look more unified. Then I can do it to the teardrops. Layer style paste. So I'm just doing this really fast. Just these inner shadows, just to round out the shape a little bit. And basically you can play with all these layer styles just by double clicking. So now if I go to my coin, what I want to do is take all these coin layers, put them into a folder so that I can keep them as vectors, but then do a drop shadow. This is a new one, underneath the whole of the coin. And I'm going to set that to have an angle here where light's hitting from this corner. And then I'm going to play with the distance and then the size and the spread. And then I can play with the opacity. So you can see that little shadow on the tongue. And I can even give it some texture. So it's using black right now, but I can make it a darker pink as a shadow for the tongue. Maybe something like this. You can see it there. Make it a little bit higher up. There we go. Up, it's just a little bit off of the tongue though, so that doesn't work. So right there. All of this is very, very precise, like vectors are. And students who don't like vector imaging don't like all the precise clicking and all the little perfectionism of it. But it's very handy in design work, right? Where often nitpicky things make all the difference. All right, what's another thing I can do? I can make the coin shiny. So I can go to the effects for the coin. The drop shadow goes outside of the coin, right? But the effects, I can do an inner glow on the coin itself. And I can make it just like an inner shadow, but this will be lighter. It will kind of shine from the edges a little bit. And that doesn't make sense on the bottom edge, so how can I change that? Well, I don't want that on that part of the coin, but what if I open it up? This is why we separate out the vectors. And I use this top part, and I'm just going to do the inner glow on that part of the coin. on the top part to make it gleam a little bit. And I'll give it some variety with its size and spread. So you see how now, without the effect, it just looks a little flatter. With the effect, it has those little glowing edges. That helps it show up, helps it be a little bit more scalable. And then the last thing I'll show you, what if I want this skull to be a little bit more textured? You can play with all these layer styles. This is how you get that kind of 2.0 effect without having to build any new vectors. I'm going to use texture on it. Now the texture, this is one of the more complex tools. It will emboss into the image, so it works on a light source, but you have to choose a texture. And the patterns, the only default patterns are pretty basic. I don't like the pinwheel. I'm not sure why that's default. But I like things like halftone or the random noise. Like that is nice. And then you can set it with your depth and your scale. So we just talked about scale for our presentation critique, how things can go big or small. This is how you can do that with texture. I'm just trying to get it to show up. It's so subtle, but this is like a paper texture. And this is getting really, really fine-tuned, but if I zoom in, you'll see it, right? It has that slight kind of pitted halftone pattern to it. And it shows, oh, I just didn't have that vector quite lined up, which is going to bug me. But it works well from a distance, right? So if you want to save a variation as 2.0, you're going to say, first, save your PSD. It will have all the options. To get to your flat graphic, you would just turn those effects off. And then you're going to say, file, export as PNG, but you rename it. You just give it a slightly different name so it doesn't overwrite your last file. So I'm going to say exercise 2 Hades shaded. We'll go to my downloads folder. I can bring that into my project folder, mark it as orange, and then I can load it to the assignment. For the optional, always optional, if you want to challenge yourself, especially if you've used vectors before and this is a first time seeing the advantages of using vector shapes as opposed to full vector paths that you create. You can get some nice controllable results pretty quickly with vector shapes. And you can see how that's just a little bit more readable and scalable by adding those highlights and shadows. All right. That is it for exercise 2.